On an undersized episode of Why Wait Till Sunday, we are going to dig into the 2021 NFL wide receiver draft class that looks different than any other class in recent memory. This is, of course, a college football show and a C2C based show, so we are going to talk about how that might affect your college wide receivers, what to look for in the upcoming classes, and if this year's class is going to tell us anything about what we can expect for draft capital going forward. But first, of course, I'm going to have to shout out campus2canton.com, my parent website, if you will. We're starting something really special there. And if you're listening to this, I guarantee you want to check out that website if you have not already. We've got an incredible data app run by Jarek Backus, which has just data and visualization of college football metrics that you cannot get anywhere else. You can compare Julio Jones in his college profile to Calvin Ridley, to Henry Ruggs, to John Mechie, if you want. You can do former and current college players, and it lines them all up on a graph. It's really groundbreaking stuff. It's amazing. And then, of course, we've got articles pumping out almost one a day. Maybe it's like one every day and a half, something like that, because we all do try to contribute there. You've got rankings, over 400 college players and 300 NFL players ranked, both on the college side and the NFL side. All you need for any fantasy football purposes. Come to campus2canton.com. And without further ado, we are going to get into the show. Hello, and welcome to Why Wait Till Sunday. I'm your host, Alfred, and I am here with a very special guest tonight.
This guy's got it all, everything you could ask for.
Longhorn fans are excited about Bijan Robinson, number 5. This is a guy that comes in as the number 1 running back recruit in the country.
Elite.
Back to the ground with Robinson, who spins and then tries to bounce it. A stiff arm, another one as he rides it, keeps his balance. They're going to say step down.
He's got tremendous upside.
By Stevenson, wrapping a little bit of pressure as he launches it downfield. Touchdown Sooners, the breakout freshman, Marvin Mims.
This is so confused on defense. Lane Kiffin was trying to get a timeout. Instead, it's a first down, and it's a touchdown for defense.
He's my play of the week. Smash potential here. That's what I'm saying.
The royalty of college football is in assembly at the Rose Bowl 2006.
All right. So we're going to dig in. This episode is going to be probably a little more brief, but I think there's some good information, certainly food for thought. And anyone listening to this, certainly take this idea, run with it, do some more slicing and dicing of the data. But I tweeted out at the end of this year's draft, as we watched all these players go, these smaller, undersized players go, and I said, the NFL does not really value the big, tall, fast wide receivers anymore. And so, I tweeted that out, got some responses and some different, opinions. But I was like, well, of course I just said that because there's something on the top of my head, and I'll just tweet stuff that I think. But I was like, is that true? I think we've talked recently about, if you're into any of the, draft Twitter or Devi Dynasty Twitter, certainly there's sentiment around the industry that the NFL is moving towards smaller, shiftier wide receivers. And that is what a lot of people say, especially when they want to defend, low BMI and things like that, that it doesn't matter anymore because the NFL is changing, and that, the rules don't, mean physicality is not nearly as big of a deal and all that kind of stuff. So like I always like to do, dug into the numbers, dug into the data. So what I did is I went all the way back to 2010. I categorized all of the wide receivers drafted in the top 3 rounds, because we know that's, the most relevant rounds where receivers are taken. Certainly, there can be gems found later, but really it's those first 3 rounds, day 2 or day 1 draft capital, that we really want to focus on. So that's what I looked at. Shows this is what the NFL is also, coveting in terms of just size. So what I did was then I categorized them all, and then I said height, weight, BMI, 40 time, 3 cone time, and 20-yard shuttle. And that's really because I was like, I don't really care about those metrics. I'm like, because the NFL, drafting players who are much, I think they're going to be smaller, but are they necessarily a lot faster in recent history? So what I found was the 2021 class, and I'm going to save that kind of as a little bit of a teaser. The 2021 class is either the start of a shocking trend or going to go down as one of the biggest anomalies in NFL draft history of certainly recent memory. So basically, let's just talk about the averages first. So the average wide receiver drafted in the top 3 rounds since 2010 is about 6.5 inches. Sorry, 6 foot flat and a half an inch, so 72.5 inches. 203.6 pounds, comes out to a BMI of 27. A 40 time of 4.46, a 3 cone time of 6.92, and a 20-yard short shuttle of 4.24. Those are your averages. Wide receivers drafted only in the first round, not that far off. The height averages at 72.8 inches, so that's about a hair under 6'1". They weigh almost exactly the same, 203 pounds on average, almost 204. So, but still, I mean, you're talking about like a half a pound difference. BMI 27 flat instead of 27.1. So again, BMI is about the same, 44340. That's 0.03 off of the average of the top 3 rounds. 6.98 3 cone. It's actually slower than the average from the whole group. And 4.26 20-yard short shuttle. Again, that's actually a hair slower than the average of the whole group. So honestly, the first round receivers don't look that much different in terms of a size, speed, metrics than the receivers drafted in the top 3 rounds when they're all combined. So another thing that I wanted to look at was, is the NFL drafting more wide receivers? Because that's another question I've kind of asked myself, as teams are moving towards more of a 3 wide receiver base offensive set, are they valuing, needing 3 good wide receivers? We saw Dallas take CeeDee Lamb, so they could have 3 pretty much stud starting wide receivers. I think the wide receiver 3 and or slot guy is becoming more and more of like just a presumed default starter. Whereas in the past, it was like if you had a great one, maybe you find a way to get him on the field. But now that third wide receiver is essentially a starter. So our team's drafting differently. And that really did show up a little bit. So, the average receivers drafted in the top 3 rounds since 2010 is right around, I must have deleted it, I apologize, right around 12.7 receivers taken in those first 3 rounds. However, in the last 3 years alone, we've had 13, 15, and 15. So we have had 15 receivers taken in the top 3 rounds in back-to-back years for the first time in the data set that I looked at, which goes back to 2010. We also have had the most receivers taken in the top 3 rounds the last 3 years. That's 2019, 2020, and 2021. Then we have had in any other 3-year span in the years that I looked at. So we've had 43 receivers taken in the top 3 rounds over the last 3 years. There is no other 3-year span. The highest of any other 3-year consecutive span was 39. And that was back in 2013, 2014, and 2015. So, is it a blip? The number, we're looking at a fairly small data set, but it certainly makes sense. And it certainly a trend that is showing teams seem to be drafting more wide receivers in the more recent years. And so as we've seen this shift from receivers to be kind of a presumed starter, including that third wide receiver on a roster, we're also seeing NFL teams draft more wide receivers earlier in the draft. Would be interesting. I didn't have time, but would be interesting to see if the total wide receivers drafted has changed, or is it just they're being drafted earlier in those top 3 rounds, or they're just more wide receivers being drafted altogether, including all the rounds? That would be something else worth looking at. Okay, so now for the, kind of the grand finale, drum roll, please. The wide receiver class in 2021 was tiny, very small on average, both in the top 3 rounds and in the first round in particular. I mean, shockingly small. There's tons of debate with Devonta Smith. And we've got Rondale Moore, we've got Elijah Moore, a lot of these smaller guys, and everyone who, wants to stand for Devonta Smith says it doesn't matter if you are small, if you can play, you can play. And other things of that nature, other arguments in that vein. But the reality is, look at the numbers. Over the last decade, the average receiver drafted in the top 3 rounds was 6 feet, half inch, 203 pounds with a BMI of 27. Devonta Smith was about the same height, but literally 35 pounds lighter with a BMI I don't even know, it was 22, 21, something like that. I mean, just so much of a size outlier, but he's not that much of an outlier in this particular class. So I just told you the averages. Let's do it again. 6 feet, 203 pounds, BMI of 27. The average receiver drafted in the top 3 rounds of the 2021 draft was 5'11" and a half, an inch shorter, 190 pounds, and a BMI of 26. Compared to the overall average, this year's draft class was 1.2 inches shorter, 13 pounds lighter, and had almost an entire point off their BMI from the average of years prior. That is a huge deal. It's so much so that this may turn out to just be a blip and there just weren't good receivers who were bigger. But, Tutu Atwell, who comes in at an astonishing 155 pounds, I think, was drafted in the, I want to say, let's see, I have it all here, 2nd round by the Rams. 2nd round, which is just mind-blowing. And then a guy like Tamorrion Terry, who a lot of people really liked as a size speed freak, 6 foot, 3 or 4, 218, almost 20 pounds probably. I don't know what he ended up running, but, certainly rumor had it, 4.4, 4.5 guy, not slow. Undrafted. So, looking back, guys like Kelvin Benjamin, who was humongous and slow and ended up being terrible, was drafted in the 1st round. Now you've got Tutu Atwell going in the 2nd and Tamorrion Terry going undrafted. It's just very interesting to me, and these may be anecdotal. These may be exceptions, not the rule. But the 2021 class is just shockingly small, and it will be interesting to see what happens. But some of the 2nd round guys, Dwayne Eskridge was only about 5'8", 5'9", and 190, so at least he was a little bit bigger. But Atwell, we've already talked about how small he is. Dimey Brown, fairly small and light, 6 feet, 189. Anthony Schwartz, 6 feet, 186. Of course, Elijah Moore's on the smaller side, 5'9"-ish and a half, 178. Of course, Devonta Smith, we know he is a smaller guy. We know Rondale Moore, 5'7", 181. So, either they're all outliers or this is a trend, because these are the guys drafted high, right? These are the guys drafted in the top 3 rounds. There were bigger receivers drafted later, but these are the guys that the NFL said, we want you on our team and we're paying a premium. Now, okay, maybe this was a fluky year. But let's just say the highest draft capital, round one draft capital. The average round one wide receiver, I'm going to say it again, about 6 feet, almost 6'1", 204 pounds, 27 BMI. This year was, again, across the board, so light. 71.6 inches. It's about under 6 feet tall, 186 pounds, BMI of 25. 25 average BMI. That, based on, again, going back the historical averages of round one wide receivers, this year's class, 1.27 inches shorter, 17 pounds lighter. That's just mind-blowing. I mean, Devonta Smith is in there bringing a lot of it down at 170, but Jalen Waddle, 180. Bateman at 190. There was no humongous receiver. The heaviest receiver in the first round was 201. That is very different than almost every other year that at least had a guy pushing 215, 220. And so again, blip or trend. I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen next year. Right now, it does look like a blip. It looks like a shocking, dramatic blip because it's just, the average BMI of the first round wide receiver is 1.4 points lower than the average round one wide receiver in the last decade put together. That's pretty dramatic. Now, they are a little bit faster, but I didn't think it was quite enough to be, too much. Although, hundredths of a second off of some of these times actually does matter. The 40 time was 0.04 faster, but we also know this year in particular, comparing to the rest of the time, we didn't have an official combine. So maybe that is factoring into some of these faster numbers. But the 3 cones came in at 0.05 seconds faster, and the 20-yard shuttle came in at 0.07 yards. 0.07 seconds faster. That's basically all I have for you today. I just thought it was really interesting. I actually thought I'd see more of a trend, but it's more of a drop off this year. I would say it's not really a trend. I mean, just for instance, wide receiver height and weight over the time frame that I looked at from 2010, almost all years, somewhere between 72 and 73 inches tall, somewhere in the 200s. In fact, there's only been one other year that the average wide receiver in the first round weighed under 200. That was in 2013, where it was 197, and this year was 190. And every other year has been at least an average of 200 pounds for the receivers drafted. BMI we talked about and things like that. So it's certainly like a cliff. I mean, it's very consistent year to year, even though we've been saying, oh, it's a trend. NFL's, taking these smaller receivers. That's not really the case until 2021. So the question is this going to be what we see going forward? How are these guys going to be utilized? Was it just a great slot class, which we know is the case? But are NFL teams just stocking up on slot receivers? Or is that just what was available this year? I wanted to have as much of a sample as I could, so I went back 10 years, but maybe 2021 is just going to end up being an anomaly. And, in 2022, we'll get back to the normal averages. I think as far as application to your Devi, Dynasty, and C2C rosters, I think maybe you could be a little looser with, your size, speed when you're prospecting and seeing about a guy who could pop and get high NFL draft capital. Now, even a guy like Tutu Atwell with his draft capital, I still, don't love it. Van Jefferson had round 2 draft capital. And he did nothing last year. I still am a believer a bit in the BMI, that you just to have that truly elite ceiling, you do need a bigger BMI to win in the NFL. And so in terms of Devi stashes, where you kind of have a limited roster there, I would still lean towards the bigger receivers until we see one of these guys pop. But I mean, we've certainly got some fairly high draft capital guys that would never fit into a BMI box. Dwayne Eskridge, Tutu Atwell, Diami's a little light. Anthony Schwartz, Rondale Moore is on the cusp, but he weighed in a little short. Elijah Moore weighed in a little light. Rondale Moore's too short. All these caveats. This year is just full of caveats. So if they all blow up, we're gonna have to really rethink this thing. But as of right now, I am not changing my, strategy really in terms of ultimate upside. Now, of course, am I going to draft a little Tutu Atwell? Sure. He's got second round draft capital. He's very, very fast. Maybe they'll be very creative and can put him in ways that he can win on the football field. I'll do a little Dwayne Eskridge. I love Elijah Moore, even though he's a little small. So I'm liking these guys, but I think overall, especially when I'm prospecting for future years, 2 and 3 years out, I'm really still going to be looking for the BMI guys. I just want to see at least about 6 feet, 190 or so. But this is certainly something worth mentioning and worth thinking about. I'll tell you, in the past draft classes, some of the smaller guys, even with high end draft capital, Henry Ruggs was one of the smallest receivers taken last year, and he kind of busted, as we know. And, I guess he kind of got a mulligan. Marquise Brown, as far as the 1 overall draft pick, very small guy, and he's kind of a bust. Andy Isabella on the smaller side, kind of a bust. Deontay Johnson on the smaller side, he's not a bust, especially where you drafted him, but he's also probably not elite. Like, he's not going to be a number 1 overall type receiver. Dante Pettis on the lighter side, bust. Really bad bust. Kiki Kuti on the lighter side, bust. Let's see. John Ross on the lighter side, bust. I am cherry picking a little bit here as I'm going through. But, as I was putting together the data earlier today too, like Marquise Goodwin, undersized, bust. TJ Graham, do you even remember who that is? A 3rd round draft pick in 2012, lighter side, bust. T.Y. Hilton, not a bust. But a lot of these guys who were lighter, let's see, Vincent Brown, Gerald Jernigan, do you even know who these people are? 3rd round draft picks who basically never did anything at all. Titus Young, 174 pounds, bust, even though he was a 2nd round draft pick. Emmanuel Sanders on the lighter side, he's obviously good. He was also elite speed, very elite speed. So, I mean, as I'm going through, NFL teams have picked some of these guys, but they, none of them really turned out to be that great. It will be interesting to see if this class, which is so dramatically small, can return some fantasy points for us. So, comment on Twitter at AlfredJF. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It's something I'm working through. And as a really big person who believes that you do need some kind of threshold size BMI stuff to be projected as a true alpha in the NFL, this is interesting information for me. Not really changing my process so far, but we'll be very interested to see how some of these guys drafted very high with a small BMI pan out. And we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Why Wait Till Sunday.